So welcome back to another video. It's AI Week, of course, here at Zuplo, and we're very fortunate to be joined by someone who's got plenty to say about the world of AI, MCP, and how all of that is going to fit together as regards APIs. I'm very pleased to be joined once again on the channel by Emmanuel Paraskakis. Thanks, Emmanuel, for joining us. Appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. It's great to be back, and thank you for having me back. And it's so exciting to talk about what you're doing and what we're all doing with AI and APIs.
Absolutely. We're in a very changeable time right now as far as API development is concerned. And, for context, in the time of this video, I saw you last week in London where you were speaking at
Exactly.
the API Days London conference about some of the things that we're going to be covering today. But it's definitely true to say that the theme of so many of the talks at that particular conference were focused on this very topic of,
Mhm.
broadly agents and AI are coming for your APIs, right?
They truly are, and I think not only are they coming, but I think they're already here. So your customers are probably experimenting with agents. Your customers want to see an MCP server. They want to know what's going to be on your roadmap. So let's dive into it.
Absolutely. So I wanted to highlight some of the things that you had in your talk there because I think it's super relevant for the people that watch these videos and also for people that are interested in moving towards building with AI as part of a way of engaging with
Mhm.
their APIs. So I think one of the things that you started to talk about was how APIs need to be discoverable and accessible as kind of like a
Mhm.
first priority, right? How is this kind of agent led discovery different from traditional API discovery?
Well, if it first of all starts, I mean, we keep on going back to the basics whenever we're discussing AI and APIs, and it first of all starts with the fact that you do have to have an API that's public, that anybody can come in and start consuming, and that API does have to have full coverage of what's in your application. And I think what people miss sometimes is that they do try to hide some functionality and put all the functionality in their web application or mobile application or whatever. And what's happening now is that agents and AI is getting very good at scraping what you have. So whether you make it an API on purpose or not, agents will find a way. And my position is that it's better to be in control and intentional and actually create an API surface. And I understand that there's going to be things that you might not want to expose, such as admin endpoints and anything that's really, really powerful that you don't want an LLM to potentially hallucinate around. But you really owe it to yourself and your customers to actually create a full functionality of APIs.
Absolutely. I mean, and also to a degree, there is a school of thought that even some of the administrative side of
Mhm.
APIs with the right levels of security
Yeah.
and access in place would also benefit either from an internal implementation or otherwise. But obviously, yes, if you're fully public, you don't want to be making
Yeah.
that kind of stuff available for discovery because the AI will run rife on that, and
Yeah.
there's no stopping them without the
And,
right
and,
back.
and you do have to take care of the authorization and your roles and your scopes and so on. And there have been recent incidents. I think GitHub had such an event where it's like, oops, the API is a little bit more powerful than we'd like to give to the AI.
Yeah,
Take care of that.
absolutely. So what are I think from this point of view,
Mhm.
what are the common gaps that you are seeing in
Yeah.
existing APIs that I guess break down in this more agentic scenario?
Let's talk about two different situations. One situation would be where you're doing things right with APIs. You were always doing your governance and consistency, and you had your API descriptions and you tested them, and everything was good in the world of APIs. For those folks, there are gaps, but they're not as extensive. Now, what I see in a lot of organizations is that even though there's an intent and a desire to innovate with AI and MCP, um, even so, some of the basics with APIs aren't there. So a lot of organizations are going to have to go back and do things right. One of the speakers at the conference actually said, "Look, we've been talking about all this stuff in conferences for a decade now. Now's the time to actually go and do it." Finally. So there's two these gaps. And if you're not doing everything right from a basics perspective, you really have to go back and figure out how do you publish APIs intentionally? How do you describe your APIs? How do you do some automated testing so your APIs that are deployed are actually the ones that you describe in your documentation and it all matches up? And of course, get in place your monitoring, observability, your gateways, and whatnot. So get the basics right, and then you can move to the next level. Now, if you're doing things right already, you're going to have to think about how agents consume an API. If you throw a complex API at an agent, it's going to actually make it difficult for the agent to invoke the API to figure out how to use the payload. And it's actually going to consume a whole lot more tokens than it should. So kind of the first job you need to do in general is to simplify your API. Make it as simple as possible to get the job done. If you're returning everything in the kitchen sink in the payload, think about what you can cut back. Because as you understand, all of this goes in the context window and then the problems start. Um, the next thing would be to think about am I naming things right? Is it easy for others, not only agents, but humans to understand? And then the next thing would be think about what use cases you would like agents to be capable of, or what use cases agents seem to be desiring, or what your customers are saying that they will do with agents. And then create bespoke APIs that maybe address one use case, not everything. So don't give me all the bits and pieces. So I have to assemble them like Legos and do, multiple steps to get to where the agent wants to be. Maybe create one API endpoint that's simple and very easy for the agent to understand what the outcome is.
How does something like model context protocol
Mm.
play into that then? Is this a way of being able to augment some of that and make elements of this somewhat simpler and controllable?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, MCP or model context protocol is more than just about APIs. But I think, and some of us think, that most of the work, most of the traffic, most of the complexity is going to be for calling APIs. So what you need to do, and because model context protocol is just a layer, a pipe that lets the agent see your API or other data sources, you're just going to have to make it easy for an MCP server to expose tools, and APIs are going to be among those tools. So think of MCP as just another way of consumers accessing your data, whether they're agents or not. So again, the simplicity goes a long way, the use case and naming go a long way, and that's going to really, really help you with MCP.
Excellent, excellent. How do you see the relationship between traditional API documentation and what agents need to
Yeah.
understand to use APIs effectively?
Look, a lot of what I've seen so far is that people use tools to generate or build an MCP server out of existing API documentation. And that documentation might take the form of a machine readable documentation, OpenAPI or GraphQL schema or whatever you have. Most of the time, it's going to be OpenAPI because most of the time, these are going to be REST-ish type APIs. So if you have really good documentation that's accurate, that's tested, and has high fidelity or perfect fidelity to your API, that's going to end. The end result is going to be a better MCP server, better tools that a model or an agent can call and actually get the job done. If your API documentation is barely documented, if there's leaps of assumption that consumers need to make, obviously the LLM is going to either hallucinate, make something up, or have a difficult time finding what it needs to do. And we've seen this over and over again. So, kind of going back to the conversation of you should get the basics right, this is something you probably already should have an accurate description of your API in a machine readable format. And as long as you have that, you'll be able to go a long way towards publishing a very high quality MCP server that agents can use.
So one of the things that you talked about last week that I think is starting to look a little bit more towards a, let's say, a less controlled discoverable
Mm-hmm.
world here, right? Autonomy, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
agents go out and they discover an API, but they can't actually access said API without some kind of authentication to go on in there.
Yeah.
And as developers right now, we go, okay, well, I need an API key, so I sign up for an account and I go and get my API key and I start testing things, and then I get my production API keys, and that's how I get my application that uses an API out there into the world. But if there's no human involved in
Mm-hmm.
this, then we end up in this scenario where all of that needs to be, I guess, in some way instantly provisioned. Can you talk a little bit
Mm-hmm.
about what
Yeah.
that means and how you see that
Yeah,
manifesting?
I think that's part of preparing your entire infrastructure. So if you were used to a situation, well, it's an enterprise API, and I want to be able to, talk to the customer, qualify the customer, maybe give them a demo, and then send them paperwork for them to sign a contract, and so on. It's obvious that that's not going to work for an agent that is coming in, wants one piece of valuable data, and then will go away. So that's not going to work. And as an organization, you're going to have to move your entire workflow to a point where these things can happen. Now, that's not easy because it might involve legal issues, it might involve infrastructure issues. It might involve changes in the way you do business, you do sales, your CRM. So that's going to be things that you're going to have to think hard about, not long because we don't have too long, but think hard about them and get on a path where you can do these things. Um, your API should be instantly provisionable because as helpful as agents and LLMs are, and they are very helpful and persistent, they don't have a long window of time in which to perform an action. So they're not going to wait for you to DocuSign a contract over. So if they're able to access information quickly, then you become part of this growing opportunity. If not, they'll bypass. And if they are autonomous, they will try to find some other source for the data. So you have to think in terms of this is an API consumer, this is maybe just another developer, but they don't have too long to wait and to think about things. So your user journey becomes compressed, and you have to think about taking every bit of friction out of it as much as you can for your business.
Absolutely. And I guess, when we enter this world, when there is a greater level of autonomy, and you mentioned it a little bit in your answer there as well, and that's that payment becomes
Mm.
a whole different thing. You know, usage-based billing is one of the things that you have on the checklist that you talk about
Mhm.
in the talk that you gave. How does this agentic world change the economics
Mm.
of API consumption, and what kind of billing patterns do you think we can expect to see?
Yeah, that's very interesting because you will have APIs and data from organizations that are monetized directly. So you expect to be paid for every piece of data that is consumed. But there's also other APIs that are indirectly monetized. So perhaps, hey, I'm member of some organization, I'm the public, or I buy a piece of software, and API consumption or the API product comes with it. In both of those cases, you are going to have to think about at least the basics of billing and monetization, because you do want to track what's going on. You do want to know what's going on, who's using what, and potentially in the future, you might want to monetize. So don't paint yourself in that corner. And why do I say don't paint yourself in a corner? Well, if you're an organization that your entire finance department and your entire financial process is based on, let's say, per seat pricing, you're going to have a difficult time transitioning to an outcome based or usage based or pay as you go type of model, which is more appropriate for agentic traffic. And again, as in the case of infrastructure, this might be something that needs a long time to fix, like changing how you do financial reporting. All of this is going to take a while. So in every case, I think whether you're directly monetizing or indirectly monetizing, I think you'd benefit from thinking about the potential of monetizing APIs in the future. And again, it's all about taking the friction points away from, let's say, making a payment or receiving an invoice or billing, and so on. And there are going to be, actually, there are emerging protocols that allow agents to go and pay. We've seen them, they start to emerge. So look at those protocols as well, because they are going to be needed at some point.
Yeah, that's the thing I was going to ask about as well, because that's the area that I'm really
Yeah.
interested in here as well. Is that traditionally in SaaS based
Mhm.
models, someone's got a credit card,
Right.
right, and they're using that to pay for something. But
Mhm.
I guess there's the question now of which approach are people going to end up deciding to take. Do you issue your agent with a virtual credit card and apply limits and allow it to go out and do stuff autonomously with that, or is there some other protocol that's a little
Mhm.
bit less
Yeah.
designed around a human approach
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
actually go and do that? Because it's you've got the combination then of needing to make a payment, but that payment not necessarily being delivered via a browser in a form that is structured for that
Mhm.
human input, right? And that's you know I'm glad that there are approaches to this starting to emerge, because I think that this is the
Mhm.
area now that we are probably going to have to start getting nailed down real quick, because
Mhm.
that's the difference now. Is like, okay, yes, discoverability around existing APIs and being able to use those once someone has set it up properly is all good, but when we go truly into the autonomous realm here, like all of these things need to be answered, and I'm really excited about that being a thing now.
Yeah, and as you correctly mentioned, there's a couple of ways to do this. So up until maybe late last year or early this year, Stripe had a concept of, look, you're going to give your agent a virtual credit card. It's going to have a budget, and thus it can go out and make payments. And that's great because you can ride on top of existing infrastructure that exists there, the regular credit card billing that exists out there. But eventually, that agent, they might, you know, get declined. They might run out of budget. Who knows what's going to happen? So now we have emerging protocols. One of them, I think, was announced very recently from Google and a big consortium of other folks. Stripe is not among them yet. It's called A2P, and basically it's an agent payment protocol. But that's just emerging. So I would say don't expect everybody to already have implemented that, but it's something that you're going to have to go and explore. And that's together with the discoverability, the instantaneous onboarding, the monetization. now you have the payment system that you have to take care of. And of course, the other thing that I'm sure we'll talk about is the authorization and authentication. And there again, we're not quite there yet. We're moving forward, but we're not quite there yet. We can talk about that if you'd like.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Let's do. We can talk about that. We could talk about
Yeah.
that bit right now. The authorization and authentication has been a problem in the world of
Mm,
APIs anyway,
mm,
right? Like
yeah.
the right level of the right access at the right
Yes.
time, is something that, depending on, actually more typically depending on uh, the industry that you're in, tends to be more or less of a focus, right?
Mm,
We see strong controls
mm,
in the financial side of this, right? In fintech and
mm,
around their APIs, you've got lots and lots of very deeply controlled things, levels and sub levels of teams and levels of RBAC, and so much control in there. But again, we're talking about humans and
yeah.
giving access
Exactly.
to humans. Obviously, it's a very different scenario when you're giving over access to agents, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And look, again, this is one of the things that's kind of in progress. It hasn't been fully baked into the spec. And we're talking about the MCP spec now here. Now, um, the MCP spec is rapidly evolving. And MCP is an open project. You can actually go get involved in it and help out figure all of these things. But we are making the steps in the right direction. So MCP initially came out with no concept of any kind of authentication or authorization. We are thinking about how to do that. Right now, you can use Auth 2.1 to actually authenticate with MCP servers. So that's good. That's great. And you also mentioned that even with our existing APIs, we hadn't figured out authentication. Well, to a degree, that was a bit of the Wild West until recently, maybe a couple of years ago, where everybody would do, authentication slightly different, and you had to read the docs and kind of like, oh, they're doing it this way. That's cute. Let me go hard code some things. I think the past 2, 3 years, we've all coalesced around some things that work. OAuth, an API key, a standard way to do API key authorization. So that's kind of working. The problem is now, at least in my view, and from what I see out there when I try to build MCP servers over APIs, is that there's no good, easy way right now to authenticate. Maybe if you have auth, it's easier. Certainly, a lot of APIs I see out there have API key, and there's no reliable way to pass through the API key yet. So, my expectation is that at some point, we are going to see an evolution of the spec that is going to include some of these things because the problem is actually very, very big. You have existing APIs out there that are based on API key, they're based on auth. These need to work.
So, in the context of, I guess API providers that have got more, let's say, older or legacy
Hmm.
systems, there's obviously going to be concern there that they're going to have APIs that are out there in the world that are discoverable, especially by agents where
Hmm.
there would be a definite lack of control necessarily. How might they start to consider preparing for this and transitioning
Yeah,
those APIs to be to be more solid when it comes to this, but I guess without breaking existing
right,
integrations that may
right.
depend on them a lot.
Look, I mean, we've had this problem all along with APIs and evolving APIs and even versioning APIs. There's always been the problem of, look, we have an API that a lot of people have integrated with. They don't want to move away. So it's not going away. And then we had to do new things in our new API. And then we most often have had parallel versions of APIs running. So that's a reality that exists there. I'm afraid that if you want the APIs to play well with AI and agents, there's no quick solution there. You are going to have to do the work of creating a better, more evolved API for agents to use. And um, again, this is an age-old problem that you probably already have seen. If you had an API that has been around for a few years, there's going to be things that you need to fix for security reasons because your customers are demanding new things, and it's just been part of the background. So you're either going to have to write some kind of translation layer or some kind of newer service that aggregates API calls perhaps and makes the APIs friendlier. And there's tools out there that exist. More tools are around these days. So that's just going to be the actual work that you have to put in. Unless you say, well, I don't care about agentic traffic, but I think in most cases that would be a mistake because I think it's going to end up being the majority of traffic, and it's a great opportunity. Rip and replace is very difficult. Most companies don't do that. But the reality is your organization might have accumulated various APIs. I see that a lot. Various APIs from acquisitions, various APIs from older products, and so on. So that's something that your API Center of Excellence and your governance process should be able to think about. There's plenty of thoughts around how to do this, and there's work that needs to be done for that.
Absolutely, and I think looking at your own preparedness checklist would be
Yeah.
a good start for
Yeah, and
for
we can put that online for people to look at, or even give them a link for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll either be linked in the comment below or it'll be linked in the description below, depending
Mhm.
on where you consume this
Mhm.
particular video. But for the sake of people watching it right now, Emmanuel, and also for the sake of time, what are the top three things from that list of 12
Okay,
that
that's
and I'll put it in a time period for you as well,
okay.
right?
So the
You've
TLDR,
got 6 months
yeah,
and you can only do three of those 12 things. Which are
yeah.
the things?
So the TLDR is probably that you should, I mean, 80% of what you're doing on your roadmap should be about getting your APIs to be friendlier with agents. So, you're going to have to prioritize. I would say if I had to boil it down to three, go publish your own MCP server, have it out there in your name that you can control and you can start playing around with, and you can start getting feedback from your users. So do that. Second, um, simplify as much as possible. Look at situations where you can simplify, aggregate, make it as few steps as possible, and then get your publishing and API building process in order. All the things around, hey, we're going to design the API first. Whether you do it with an LLM or other tools doesn't matter. It's still design first. So design the API, design intentionally what you want to expose as tools out there, and make sure that whatever you're building, vibe coding, whatever you're doing, is actually tested and documented. So I would say these are the three things: work on the process, work on the design, and uh, go play around with MCP.
You also have been teaching a lot of courses
Mm-hmm.
recently that have been targeted at product managers predominantly. That is also your background as well. I'm curious, when you've been doing those courses, the people that are coming in, what are the biggest misconceptions that people have had about uh, getting prepared for MCP and agentic usage when
Yeah.
it comes to APIs?
Yeah, the shocking truth is that most people come in and think that their infrastructure and APIs are at a good level, and then they discover that it's not. That they have to go back to basics and fix not only the API part of it, but coding practices,
Mm.
ops practices. We keep talking about this stuff, but a lot of us are in an echo chamber where we think that it's expected that people do all of the good things that we've learned over the past couple of decades. Most organizations don't do that. So that's the shocking thing. And that's the eye opener for folks that, oh, we better go back and fix the basics, documentation, naming, the boring things, before we can do a good job with AI ready or AI usable uh, APIs. And I see this over and over and over again in name brand companies that you thought would be doing a much better job.
We'll finish up by looking to the future, and these are always interesting to come back to in a period of time, just to see, just to see whether anything actually like did come true. But this, I think that the world of AI and MCP are probably the biggest drivers for
Mm.
change in the API ecosystem right now. What do you think
Mm.
that ecosystem is going to look like in 18 months?
Yeah, I think we're gonna have a lot of progress in the MCP spec. I think we're gonna solve all the baby problems that we have right now. I think, secondly, people are going to realize how unprepared their infrastructure and their existing APIs are, and kind of make a move towards fixing them. I think the one that I'm really worried about and that is going to get us in slow progress is the problem of potential prompt injection. That's a thing that I think we think we can easily fix because we can filter out certain strings like we did with SQL injection and whatnot. But I think it's much, much harder because by nature, an LLM is designed to take anything in as a prompt and in a very friendly and persistent manner act on it. So anything could be a prompt, anything could, let it go off the rails. And with MCP and APIs, we are basically giving inputs to a model from something that we might not control. It might be user input. It might be things that I enter in a name or a description, or anything like that, and it might end up being ingested by the LLM. So that's something that I think might, delay things, might cause some trouble. But I think we are going to get over that eventually.
Emmanuel, it's always great to have you come and
It's
share
fun.
the insights. And it was a great talk that you did at API Days London. I know a lot of people in the room took a lot away from it. There was a lot of photographs of slides that people took at that time. So
That's
no,
always a good sign, isn't it?
absolutely. I mean, if there was ever a great metric for
Yeah.
how well has a talk gone, it's how many people and how often this happens when they're watching that particular talk. And hopefully, that information is being
Yeah.
disseminated widely throughout many companies across the European API ecosystem right now, and people are hard at work implementing all of the
Yeah.
best practices that you shared on that day.
Absolutely. And thank you to you guys at Zuplo, but also other kind of modern API toolsets that are doing great work at redefining how we build and consume and provide APIs out there. It's very encouraging to see what's being built. And again, kudos to you guys at Zuplo for doing such a great job.
Well, we love compliments and we'll absolutely take it. Thanks very much, Emmanuel. We appreciate that. We do what we can, and we'll definitely be doing more, especially to make sure that people have got the tools available to work as effectively and as programmatically as they can in this particular
Absolutely.
space, as goes for this week where we're launching the AI Gateway. So, Emmanuel, great to have you here. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
And yeah, we will see you again soon, no doubt.
Thanks so much, Martin.